Hola, buenos días.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Jose Bravo. Latin America and the Caribbean is home to 40% of global biodiversity, over 30% of available fresh water on the planet, and almost 50% of tropical rainforests in the world are in the region. However, natural resources are under threat. The world needs to increase biodiversity financing from $120 billion a year to between $722 billion and $967 billion over the next 10 years. I'd like to invite you all to this upcoming conversation with experts who will discuss biodiversity, its social impact and scope, what is being done, and how development and inclusion are being advanced in the Amazon region.
Buenos días.
Good morning. My name is Greg Watson. I am the lead specialist on natural capital of the IDB. I have a great panel with us with panelists who are going to share their perspective on the importance of biodiversity and natural capital. In the President's opening remarks, it became clear that we have no time to lose. Climate change is one of the biggest drivers behind biodiversity loss. The environment is our biggest ally in taking on this challenge. We also know that the environment has a close link to the social and economic agendas in our countries. That is not only something that has to do with birds and fish. The IDB is working actively on this. We are going back to natural capital in our work, providing support for countries to include natural capital in their policies and investment strategies, and also driving financial investment in the market with government partners. Against this backdrop, we bring our panelists to you today. They're going to share their experience on these issues. We are going to begin with a first round of questions for each of the panelists, and we'll give them 5 minutes to answer. I'll begin with Dr. Carola Moreno, who is the Finance and International Affairs Coordinator in the Ministry of Finance of Chile. Ms. Moreno, it is truly an honor, and it was an honor for the IDB to work with you in creating the first trust fund for conservation in Chile. Based on the success of this initiative, Chile is beginning to integrate the value of nature in economic analysis across a number of different ministries by creating a national committee on natural capital. The IDB is also working with you on this. Could you share a little bit more about that work? Why this effort matters for Chile at this time, and also what you, as a representative of the Finance Ministry, are looking for. Thank you very much, Gregory. Thank you to the IDB for having me. I'd like to acknowledge all of my fellow panelists and everyone in the audience. Let me just say that Chile is a country that has a very rich biodiversity. The financing is falling short of what is needed, and therefore the Finance Ministry, in keeping with what it has to do under the Environmental Act, is in charge of creating the necessary financial policies. This is what led to the creation of this Natural Capital Committee. This is an advisory panel that advises and counsels the President. And the idea for this committee is to go above and beyond. This is not a committee for any given administration. The first goal it has is to create an approach that allows it to really appreciate the value of ecosystem services. This is why we need to understand what the natural capital stock is, but based on that, come to an assessment not only of what the forest represents, but also how there are services that come from this that go beyond what is tangible. That is a long-term initiative, an effort that also comes with the responsibility of being able to leverage that information and inform policies so that this growth that we tend to call sustainable growth, for it to really be sustainable, and for there to be economic growth that doesn't come to be at the expense of natural capital, which could lead to losing our ecosystems. This is an impact we've seen before. And so overall, the idea is to increase in financing, but to do that, we need data, not just on natural capital, but also on other issues. I won't go into too many details there, but we do work a great deal with the IDB, of course. We thank the IDB for being with us, but we also need the private sector to join us in order to have true cooperation between the public and private sector. So in a nutshell, that has been our experience. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That's exactly right. We need to have more interconnected action within the climate and diversity actions and use that value in decision making, and not only to have more efficient public spending, but as you said, that can also bring more private investment into the mix. To elaborate on that a little bit more, we have Slav Gatchev, who's a managing director of Sustainable Debt Nature Conservancy, and the question will be in English.
There's been a lot of discussion of Barbados' debt for nature conversion, which was the first time a development bank supported this kind of structure. In this deal, TNC worked with the IDB, providing a $50 million guarantee, which combined with a $100 million guarantee from the IDB, simultaneously reduced the country's debt burden and funded a long-term marine natural capital investment. Given that many other countries are now exploring similar deals, what are your thoughts on the importance of these operations, the emerging structure, and the role of organizations like TNC?
Thanks so much, Greg, and thanks to the BID for inviting me, and apologies for speaking in English. I come from Bulgaria, and in the United States, many people confuse Bulgaria and Bolivia, so maybe I should be more fluent in Spanish, but I kind of, don't know all the technical words, so I excuse my English here. And indeed, Greg, many countries are facing, if you will, a triple biodiversity, climate, and debt crisis in the region. Looking globally, fully 1/3 or 30 countries that are members of the Emerging Market Bond Index right now facing yields to maturity exceeding 10%. Which practically means that they're shut out of the international capital markets. And in your region, in our region, 10 sovereigns are either in default or facing, very high yields exceeding 10%. And in a way, these are the lucky ones. You can call them, you could say that now they're facing a degree of distress, but they tend to be even the larger countries that floated Eurobonds in the first place, let alone some of the more frontier markets that were shut out from the international markets in the first place. And so together with you, together with the IDB, we came up with a solution that addresses this triple crisis at its core. And that is to refinance pre-existing unsustainable sovereign debt at lower rates, thus generating substantial savings that can then be invested in biodiversity and climate outcomes. And so indeed, in that landmark transaction that we did together, which closed last September, we refinanced $150 million of pre-existing Barbados debt with a new facility arranged by Credit Suisse and CIBC. They're in the audience, so say hi. Benefiting from co-guarantees by, indeed, IDB providing $100 million and TNC providing $50 million. And this was a super innovative structure because effectively IDB figured out how to use their policy-based guarantee in this context to effectively create a truly meaningful sustainability issuance, sustainability-linked issuance. And so I have to give major props to IDB as a global leader in this respect among the multilateral development banks. You truly have blazed the trail there. And we were super honored to be partnering with Prime Minister Mia Mottley and her visionary government. And Mia Mottley and her government agreed to channel 100% of the savings, $50 million out of the $150 million issuance over 15 years, towards protecting Barbados's exclusive economic zone, its ocean. And the ocean is very much on our minds. Panama, right here, hosted just a couple weeks ago the Global Ocean Summit, and the ocean is the least funded of all the sustainable development goals, and that's why it's very important to invest in it, which we did also about now 18 months ago in Belize, where we did the first of these modern era debt conversions or debt for nature swaps, where we refinanced $550 million of pre-existing Belizean debt, unlocking $180 million over a 20-year period. And so, in summary, these deals are sizable. They move the needle for willing sovereigns. In many instances, the funding that they unlock, double or triple pre-existing budgets for biodiversity, and the savings get channeled through independent domestic conservation funds like Fondo Acción that we're going to hear about very shortly. And so also in the case of Belize and Barbados, this allowed the governments to protect 30% of their oceans. And so, we at TNC, we want to continue to move forward with this theme. We have several other deals in the pipeline that we're hoping to do with you, Greg, and your colleagues. And moving also adding to this theme, future deals can focus, for example, on the Amazon and tropical forest conservation, which I know is the theme of a follow-on panel. And so, we will plow ahead and help to address these challenges through this innovative financial mechanism.
Great, thanks, Slav. I do think the Barbados Debt for Nature transaction is a success story of showing how targets on the environmental side can link to key performance indicators on the financial side, and we can wrap all of this together. And it's critical financial innovation for large-scale finance. Continuando con esa conversación.
Now, in keeping this conversation going on financing, I would like to turn to Mr. Federico Martínez Waltos, the Chief Administrative Officer of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, Argentina. One of the key issues on COP15 on biodiversity was the growing excitement around diversity credits and how that can lead to new markets. The IDB and IDB Lab have been helping with tokenization of natural assets. The IDB is supporting and being part of creating new classes of natural assets. In Argentina, you're also exploring a new and exciting class of assets. NFT tokens and its creation helps with natural capital. This can create value flows to conserve and restore biodiversity and can lead to more revenue for the government. Can you talk to us about that program and the necessary work to make that market possible, and when that token is going to come into existence? Thank you, Gregory, and good morning, everyone. Greetings from my fellow panelists. The ECHO token is an initiative we've been working on within the government that started last year. We're very excited about this. It's really important for us to be here to talk about this project. Where did this come from? This was in response to the current climate crisis affecting us all, really, and also the shortcoming, or should I say, the lack of implementation means and incentives. That is where the government, with the available technology and with work that cut across different sections and organizations, came together to actually make progress on this. So what is this? This is a novel tool. This is a financial mechanism that seeks to align funds to funnel them to to sustainable development programs. There are these social reports and other monitoring activities that are being conducted through blockchain. And the idea is to create this instrument, again, that can help us channel existing funds, create innovative instruments, and also meet specific demands that our country has on the ground. We very much applaud and welcome the support we get from the IDB on this initiative. Obviously, we are strongly making headway with our first pilot in the north of our country in a national park. This is in Chaco province, and so we're partnering with that province. We're a federal system, and so that's how we work. And we have 7 specific work streams. We have the legal area. That's where we're working with the IDB. Thank you to the IDB for the support. When it comes to outreach and participation, particularly with the Escazú agreement that was ratified by our country. There's also the MRB's design and implementation that we're working on with the World Bank. There's the technology development of blockchain. There's a Casa de la Moneda government agency working on this. And the MRB measurement system with a nature map that is working on this, obviously getting support from government agencies like CONAI and ARSAT, which make it easier to access information, technology, and satellite technology, etc. And the idea is to be able to tap into the best available information to measure these ecosystem services that we get from our biodiversity. In 2004, Argentina came up with a very interesting position. The idea was to actually highlight the value of these ecosystem services, especially in our country where we have 40% of the world's biodiversity. We have ecosystem services that allow us to pretty much have the kinds of conditions to still be alive as a species. This is why we need to find the right mechanisms to keep going forward. And so we're pitching one today, but we know there are other initiatives. And the idea is to actually utilize these services and make the most of them. We are environmental lenders as well. And that's why we want to make the most of the services we provide. These are the tools that we have come up with to better channel these financial flows. We would like to encourage everyone to be part of this effort. This is a collective effort. We're consistently raising the bar. And we know that we are facing high expectations. We're creating something new. We're discussing things that have to do with the very definition of traditional economic notions. And so this is why we have tapped all levels of government. I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation so we can continue moving forward on this. Thank you very much. That's a very interesting example of an alternative market. We can also make more of regulated markets and more traditional markets for biodiversity finance, tapping into all of the work that has already been done to take on the climate challenge as it pertains to biodiversity. And that brings us to another field example, but this time we're focusing more on carbon credits and how they can be used to have a bigger social impact. We have Director Arango, who is with us from Fondo Acción. Fondo Acción has a lot of experience on climate projects, working with Black communities and indigenous communities. Can you talk to us about a project that involved carbon credits and how the same logic can be applied for the biodiversity agenda? What do you believe the bank's role should be in these kinds of projects and processes, especially when we think about the Afro-descendant community and indigenous communities? Thank you, Greg, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about our experience. This is something everyone is talking about, but also that leads to a lot of questions. there is a Colombian environmental fund known as an ETF, Environmental Trust. It was created in 2000 to have the first debt relief program between Colombia and the United States, as well as a first debt swap, which means that from the very beginning, we were part of designing and operating financial sustainability mechanisms. In 2009, when we started working on these lowering emissions from deforestation and environmental degradation, we started to get a reputation. We were working on the enabling conditions so that projects to lower emissions, taking into account biodiversity and social benefits, so that all of that can become a reality, because it seemed to us to be a mechanism that could help us finally settle this dilemma, how to have human development at the heart of conservation efforts. That was a 14-year-long road, starting when it was created, and we've been able to work on 12 different projects, wearing different hats. These aren't only carbon-based projects. Of course, they work on biodiversity conservation, and they use this currency that's known as carbon, but these are these kind of red, REDD projects. I have a portfolio of 8 different projects. As a matter of fact, there's been support from the IDB through the Fondo Colombia for Sustainable Environment, and these are red projects in the Pacific side of Colombia, but they belong to 20 Black and Indigenous communities. One is Black Colombian, the other is Indigenous communities, and these are these bio projects. Altogether, they cover 800,000 hectares of tropical rainforests in the Pacific, and are benefit over 50,000 people. These are minority projects. There is no middleman that is the intermediary between those providing the service and those benefiting from the service. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, and how we were able to turn this stroke of genius sounding idea into something that is real. This started in 2015. We started seeing these projects come into play in the carbon market mindset. The carbon tax was also created by the tax authorities. I know that this is probably a topic for a different setting, but that portfolio has led to 10 million tons of reduced emissions that have now come into the market, even the international market. 700,000 forest hectares have been preserved, and they are home to at least 70 indigenous species and endangered species. Deforestation of 30,000 hectares in forests have been turned away, diverted, thanks to what is coming from carbon financing, which has turned these activities into different kinds of activities and keeping the forest alive. I know that all of you are here at an IDB meeting, and I'm sure you want to hear about things that are less poetic and not so much about the look as anything else, thinking about biodiversity. But these resources invested by those communities have allowed, in many cases, to actually change how people move around. There are piers that have been built, and wharfs and bridges. There is the Andes erosion that has been prevented. Water supply systems have been transformed. There has been a reconditioning of supply systems. Basic sanitation has been improved by using wastewater and rainwater. These communities, with all of these resources, have been able to create healthcare teams in different areas. And just as an aside, these are isolated communities. There's no airport. Many times they only have access to places by water. And during COVID, these resources allowed for actually addressing the COVID emergency. It was the sale of these carbon credits that helped with biodiversity, that helped address the COVID emergency. Now, in terms of the complementary value chains, we have cacao, we have coconut and other crops that are part of that business. And so this is a mechanism to fund biodiversity using carbon as a currency. What can the IDB do here, just to get to the last question? I would say that in general, and I have to say this, I know that it may sound abstract and broad, but we need to actually galvanize these peer organizations in order to make natural capital and the value of natural capital be at the heart of a new growth model. We have a model where natural capital tends to be in satellite accounts and not in the core account. We need to also increase more green taxonomy and combined and blended accountability or accounting rather models and other mechanisms so that the financial sector can adopt these measures and flow more resources to those who own the land and who ultimately make the call. What are we doing with this land? And for that decision to be protected by the financial system. Financing member countries as well to build the kind of organizational and institutional regulatory infrastructure that's needed for biodiversity markets. We read all the time that there are problems in the carbon market, of course, but let's create a biodiversity market that can draw from lessons learned with strong government, with strong regulation, and with the ability to actually enforce those regulations, especially when we think about biodiversity, because that is ultimately in the hands of local communities. We need to protect with strong safeguards these communities' rights, which for generations have been the stewards of these forests and now being dealt with intermediaries that are keeping most of the funds in their pockets. Lastly, working with the services sector, the tertiary sector, NGOs, the government, and civil society, that's a perfect partnership for building a bridge between the local community, governments, and development banks.
Thank you, Natalia. You definitely gave us a long list of things to do. And with that, we can go on to our last panelist, Rosabel Miró, from the Audubon Society here in Panama. The Audubon Society has a project here in Panama financed by the IDB with resources from the United Kingdom. And it is for coastal systems, for mangroves, and looking at the policy value. But also there are other incentives having to do with behavioral changes involving women, young people, owners of infrastructure, government, everything that you were saying. So Rosabel, actually, you are working with all of those that receive services from this ecosystem. Could you tell us a bit about the project approach? How is it creating a policy that favors changes, and what are the expected results? Thank you, and good morning. I am pleased to be able to take part in this panel. I come from a very small organization here in Panama, Organizate Panama. We've been working for 50 years, and we have had a great opportunity of being included in this project. It is because working with the National Audubon Society, we were able to come up with this great idea of approaching the IDB and creating this project that is very closely tied to the title of this panel, and that is biodiversity for our benefit, for development. So the blue property tries to build and improve the coastal areas of Panama. We want to protect the mangroves, the wetlands that are associated with them, and we hope to be able to do this through scientific research by gathering information on how much carbon is captured by these mangroves, and we want to highlight the biodiversity that lives in them. Every time that we walk through these places, every time we gather information, we realize how valuable our coastal wetlands are here in Panama. Also, this project tries to improve the livelihoods of the people living in these areas, and that is something that we are doing by working with education. We're reaching these communities, educating them, working with local authorities to improve policies and also to improve behavior. We want to make certain that they be fully aware of how important these wetlands are. Now, this blue economy has helped us develop a strategy, and we have a conservation plan for the bay, Amarita Bay, one of the places that we're working. And I forgot to mention that we have the Panama Bay, but also we did some important activities. We were received by the communities, and together we have a strategy to deal with the challenges. And right now, several communities realize that the sea level is rising as a result of climate change, also pollution, a loss of habitat. All of these things concern them. And we're also seeing that land management is absolutely essential right now, where we are losing coast, not only because of erosion, but also because of the sea level rise. These places in both bays where we're working closely with the schools, with the teachers, with children, so as to create greater environmental literacy, for them to be acquainted with biodiversity, wetlands, learn more about climate changes, the water cycle, energy, all of these different issues that if we aren't educated, we will not be able to deal with all of these problems that are related to risk. There are many communities that are dealing with risks. And so these children, even though they are very young, need to know how to deal with the risks. Now, with the Ministry of Education, we're working with them. We have a project that we call the Green Classroom, and it's a project, and last year, thanks to that project, with the IDB, we were able to reach 18 schools in both of the sites. And what we want to do is to reach more and more schools so as to teach about the importance of wetlands in the Bahia de Panama and the Bahia de Garita. Also, we're working with the communities, and we are promoting through this project conservation of wetlands, working with other actors of societies, CSOs, companies, local organizations, scientists, all of this with a view to creating a national chapter of the International Partnership for Wetlands. And that is going to allow us to work side by side with the National Wetlands Committee that was created here in Panama in 2006. It supports the government, and it provides advice in terms of wetlands and implementing the Ramsar Convention. This is part of implementing the Ramsar Convention. So this is a good point. I have been engaged in this effort personally for 25 years, and the organization is working on everything related to wetlands. So this is a good time to form these partnerships so as to get better cooperation, not only at the local level, but also internationally, so we can create local and regional initiatives, new policies that favor conservation of mangroves and wetlands, and that has helped us form media campaigns. So we share this message of the importance of mangroves, and we look at how we can share this information because we think we know a lot, but there's much more to be learned. And it's important to not only look at the North-South relationship, but a worldwide relationship. Now, in terms of result of the project, we see that this project is going to allow our authorities to base their policies on science and technology so they can improve their environmental and climate agenda and its management, not only locally, but nationally. The commitment that we have with the nationally determined contributions is something that is supported by the government, and we want the NDCs to be effective. Thank you. Thank you, Rosabel. And a very important thing that you just said is that, and it's something we hadn't spoken about before, is that everything comes in, but it's important that it be science-based. It's important to have an economic assessment that is well done, and it has to also be based on science. All of us consider that to be essential. We have 10 more minutes, so I do have another question. We talked about policy, financial, social innovations, and everything that is moving the financial needle. So we see that a major cooperative effort is required amongst all of us. We need to work with governments, NGOs, so as to attain the ambitious objectives of the global framework for biodiversity that was just approved in Montreal in 2015. That is going to guide countries, the private sector, NGOs, all of us, guide us in terms of everything we do up to 2030. So from your standpoint, what will your organization do in the short term to begin to implement this global framework? And how can the IDB support you? Can you take 1 minute, please, to quickly respond to my question? I'm going to begin here on my left. I'm sorry. I wanted to say that the role played by the Ministries of Finance is very important. A country that was in charge of promoting this platform for the Ministries of Finance was the IDB. That's why I bring it up. We have regional support. And one of the commitments and from the Ministry of Finance, the agenda that we have was well aligned with this effort. So we collaborate within that platform with other countries. We collaborate internally with other ministries. I already talked about the Natural Capital Committee, the Ministry of the Economy, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Environment, of course, and also with the technical advice coming from the Central Bank of Chile and the Council on Science, Technology, and Innovation. So all of this is very important because we interact a lot with the private sector, something that I already mentioned. And this is aligned with one of the objectives, which is trying to engage the private sector so as to be able to mobilize resources. And I would conclude by saying that the role of the Ministry of Finance in this connection is to create certainty, to put together rules of the game, a strategy, so that the other actors can be involved. Another important role is to mobilize resources, and there the Ministry of Finance was quite innovative. We heard mention of the sustainability-linked bonds. We in Chile launched the first sovereign bond, and now we want to issue a bond on biodiversity. So I hear keywords, coordination and rules.
Discussion. I'm going to take 30 seconds to reflect on what the prior panelists said about the conservation funds, because this point cannot be overestimated or overemphasized. The world of global finance is weird and wonderful. It looks more like a circus now, but this too shall pass. But that doesn't matter as much. Whatever we do here in this room, ultimately what we produce, the bleeding edge of what we do, is what these guys are doing, right? Through Fondo and Acción and the Audubon Society of Panama and organizations like that. And so they are the ones who take, the proceeds, if you will, from these financings and fund real action on the ground. And so that role is fascinating and super, super important. And that's why we at TNC have had such a pleasure and privilege to work with Siempre Costa Rica, for example, seeding these conservation funds with the hope that they will grow wings and transcend the initial financing and do a lot more going forward. And so doing a lot more going forward is exactly what we want to do at TNC to be in compliance and aligned and helpful to the global biodiversity framework. We were one of the organizations that was advocating very actively for the passage of that global treaty effectively. I was privileged with you to be in Montreal when the treaty was passed, and our whole organization for years, even before the passage of the treaty, when you think about all these deals, they're aligned, right? They foreshadow the global biodiversity framework and 30 by 30. And so as an organization, we have our 2030 goals, which are basically meant to move the needle towards these objectives. And so that strategies is one of the key pathways towards that objective. And so I'm going to get now to my punchline, Greg, which is that here, your board of directors will meet in just 48 hours or so. And so I have one early Christmas wish list, okay, which is the following. Your guarantee product is extremely powerful, can be even more powerful in mobilizing external financing, debt capital markets financing, to transcend, the constrained credit rating of many sovereigns, Chile and Uruguay excluded, right? And to be able to do so even more aggressively, I believe, the IDB would benefit from not using $1 of guarantee capacity, right, against $1 of direct lending capacity. And you already, thank you. You already have demonstrated that in a very creative way through your rapid response facilities, right, for climate and other disasters, where those lines of credit do not absorb one-to-one the lending headroom of countries. And so if your board, if there are governors here, I'm lobbying you directly from this stage to be thinking about how to mobilize external funding where the leverage effect would be so much greater than one-to-one. So I'm off my soapbox.
Thanks, Slav. Estoy consciente del tiempo.
I'm keeping my eye on the clock, so I'll go on to the other panel members. Federico? In Argentina, we're really happy that there is a roadmap, like the agreement that we are talking about today. It's important that there be that roadmap, but at the same time, we think it's even more important to have the means to reach those goals. And that is why we continue to call for the commitments that have been taken on by developing countries be complied with, and that they have the means to implement them. Also, in the South, we are generating these innovative mechanisms. We are engaged in these initiatives using technology that is available, scientific knowledge, but we think that it is really important to be able to move ahead in terms of looking at the means for implementation. Our country just signed a contract with the IDB, and it is for HIRSU 2. That is the management of solid urban waste. And tomorrow, the minister, along with the president, will be inaugurating an environmental center that allows us to take concrete action in the field that will make a reality happen for people that are working in a dump. This is in Concordia, in the province of Entre Rios, one of the poorest communities in our country. So to have something that focuses on natural capital, this is something that we would ask for support from the IDB board and from other transnationals. These are things that we need to take concrete action. In terms of our goals, we are making important strides. We have increased our protected areas. We are creating a new protected area in the ocean, a marine protected area that will go to Congress soon. We are strengthening the budget using resources from the Ministry of the Environment. Basically, that budget has doubled in the last few years. And also, we are looking at an investment between 50 and $100 million to strengthen communities. As we said, it's the communities that protect our forests. So basically, that is the end of my comment. Thank you. Natalia? The fund was created as a way to facilitate the Biodiversity Convention. So we focus on those activities. But to respond to your question, I would focus on goals 1, 2, and 3. That would be creation of protected areas, maintenance of those areas, for example, with the Environmental Heritage Fund or another fund that benefits 3 protected areas. These are long-term mechanisms. Then goal 8, which is to minimize the impact of climate change. That's a program I really like. The Climate Action Fund for boys and girls that focuses on adaptation, mitigation of climate change in the most vulnerable places with the most vulnerable population. There we have donations coming from civil society, and we hope that that can become permanent. Also, Goal 11, which is nature-based solutions, that is a fund that I was describing, the Climate Action Fund, but we're beginning another project with German support, and there we have nature-based solutions. Also, the green and the blue economy, there we have technical and administrative funds so as to reduce emissions and protect biodiversity and communities. And then 19, goal 19, financing with the mechanisms that we already have. So we have donations, also sovereign funds with very long duration, also debt swaps, other mechanisms. We're working closely with the private sector on different impact modalities. And lastly, strengthening communities, not as co-beneficiaries, but as owners of the decision-making. Now, what can the IDB do? It can mobilize resources for nature-based solutions, especially focusing on long-term action. That has the greatest impact. For example, the Carbon Fund, environmental impact, also working with the owners of the land. They are the ones that make the decisions. Also putting natural capital in the center of our minds. Isabel, 1 minute, we're over time. The global biodiversity framework leads us to work on conserving species to avoid their extinction. 2 very specific examples here in Panama. We have species, sometimes we don't know what their life cycle is like, and we have to gather information for the life cycle to know how to protect these. We have the cotinga, and that bird lives in the mangroves east of Panama. Right now, those mangroves are being promoted to build a multimodal port, and that is, the environmental groups are not in favor of building that port because of the destruction this will cause. Another example is the pájaro hermoso. It lives in the cloud forest in the highlands. It's called cotinga, or umbrella bird. It has beautiful feathers, and it's called an umbrella bird. And it migrates from the highlands to the lowlands in the Caribbean and Panama. And it lives in forests that are currently being destroyed to mine, to do open pit mining in Panama. An activity that is very questioned right now. It doesn't have a completely legal existence. Actually, the mining is illegal, and we need to gather information to see how we can preserve these sites to protect these species and avoid their extinction. Now, what do we need from the IDB? Collaboration. Collaboration with local groups. There is already information that has been gathered in the case of mining. Panama is not a country well suited to mining, and we need local groups to be strengthened. They need to learn more about how to deal with these problems, and there the IDB can help us, not only by making certain that these species will not become extinct, but also making sure that our local groups are strengthened. Thank you. Thank you. We have gone over time. So I'm not going to say much as closing remarks, just to say that we know that solutions that are positive for nature can create $10 billion of wealth in the world. And in the IDB, we are committed to leadership. We want to bring to the table experience, knowledge, and we want to collaborate with all of the players here. We talked a lot about the linkage between policy and finance and the work that we have to do to make sure that natural capital is mainstreamed and that it be seen as part of development as well as social and economic cycles. So I conclude, and that way we can go on to the second panel of this session. Thank you.
Muy interesante ha sido
Very interesting. This conversation was very interesting, and how the connection between political, financial, social action, and how all of this dovetails with actors from the government, civil society, the private sector, how all of this is essential as we fight to protect biodiversity. There's no doubt regarding the importance of the Amazon for local communities and for the world. So it is a natural source of wealth. It provides more than 40% of the fresh water in Latin America. It regulates the air quality. It also stores carbon emissions, and it controls the water and nutrient cycles in South America. On the panel called Biodiversity Development and Inclusion in the Amazon, we are going to be hearing from leaders and experts on the challenges and opportunities that exist in the region. It is my pleasure to call on Tatiana Shore. She is the unit chief of the Amazon region at the IDB.
Buenas tardes, buenos días a todos.
I was going to say good afternoon, but I should say good morning. We are still waiting to have lunch. We are discussing the potential that biodiversity and natural capital have when it comes to development in Latin America. We're going to be talking about a specific area now, which is the Amazon region. There is no doubt around how important the Amazon is for local communities, for countries, and also for the planet. The Amazon is home to 40% of the world's fresh water. It's important it plays an important role in regulating the climate and also with biodiversity preservation, but also helps native communities. In the Amazon, we have the indigenous communities that have not come in contact with others, and they're an important group to think about for the region and for the world. What's important too is that in the Amazon, there are very few people who understand or realize that there was a population transition and an urban transition that was perhaps one of the most significant in the last 2 decades. The Amazon is playing an important role in structuring opportunities for the individuals who live in these areas when it comes to education services. All of the markets are in cities, and many of these cities are small. There are other medium-sized cities like Iquitos and Florencia in Colombia, but we also have major cities like the metropolis I'm from, which is Manaus, which has a population of 2.2 million people, and it's at the heart of the Amazon. Manaus also has the industrial center. We don't think about the Amazon as being part of the industrial policy or as part of the economic transition for countries and jurisdictions. But it's important because employment opportunities, development opportunities, they also come from how forest products can add value. That said, people, communities in the Amazon, whoever they may be, in the small, medium-sized, or large cities, it's important to think about those who are in the periphery, in suburban areas. Close to 40% of Amazon peoples live below the poverty line. 60% of households are disadvantaged. We have urban services and sanitation and transportation services and access to basic healthcare services, just like in other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. But it's something to think about. We also have significant challenges when it comes to an internet connection and access to the internet. Half of the population of the Amazon basin live too far from cell towers and don't have access to the internet. That's a problem not only when it comes to getting on social media, which is important. There are a lot of young people in the Amazon, and that is an important platform for young people to engage with the world. But with the little access there is to internet connection, there are fewer opportunities for public policy access or services that come from that, like distance learning or medicine and healthcare. So an internet connection is also important for this region. When we think about the complexities in the Amazon region, it's so large and vast. If we think about it as a surface area, that is the 6th largest country in the world in terms of surface area, the 2nd largest in Latin America, behind Brazil. So we're talking about a very diverse region with a very diverse population, with very diverse societal makeup, and also challenges that we have to understand. So what can we do? It's clear that cooperation and collective action is key. We need to engage all segments of the population, be they traditional mainstream populations and groups, indigenous groups, the government, the private sector. And what's really important as well are civil society organizations. And we need to have regional coordination with the organizations that can make a difference. These are significant challenges for us as the IDB. The IDB group recognized this challenge and was able to have the Amazon Unit Coordination Initiative. And it's important to take note of it because it is the only MDB that has internal coordinating unit so that its engagements in the Amazon region can be blazing trails and are cutting edge, and so that we can look at the Amazon region through a special Amazon lens. The Amazon unit has its financial resources, but it works with all of the financial mechanisms and instruments in the IDB's arsenal, with all IDB sectors, with IDB Lab, IDB Invest, and it is seen as a coordinating unit. This is why, and this is interesting, when the Amazon initiative was created at the IDB, I see Mr. Juan Pablo, who is here. It had that vision that in order to preserve forests, we needed to look at what was happening on the ground. So as part of the Amazon initiative, there are 4 important pillars. One is bioeconomy. We talk a lot about bioeconomy and a lot about the potential the forest provides. That's great, but there is no bioeconomy without infrastructure, without an internet connection, sustainable and inclusive cities, among others. That's number 2. Number 3, in the Amazon, There's also a strong agricultural and livestock farming sector. It's an important industry for the economy, but also an important industry for local communities. So we need to take a look at agriculture, looking at sustainable livestock farming, and include them in discussions on sustainability in the Amazon. That's number 3. Number 4. Under this pillar, we have the individuals who are there on the ground, their education, healthcare, and that is what we overall call human capital. And that's interesting because when we look at the Amazon region, for example, we look at the Brazil, Peru, Colombia border. On the Brazilian side, there are 3 universities with live-in researchers and a number of PhD students. On the Colombian side, there is one of the biggest research centers on Amazon studies. And that's important because with this center and with the National University and campuses in Leticia, there's an opportunity there to do innovative work on the bioeconomy with the local communities. On the Peru side, we have IAP. That's also a research center. It's an important center. But beyond that, we look at science as part of that jurisdiction governance. These are knowledge and different people and all these different elements that remain in the region for a long time. Under this Amazon initiative, there are also 3 cross-cutting pillars. One is institution strengthening for governments, for CSOs, for indigenous and black communities, but also for the private sector. How can we work on an economic model in the Amazon without a local and robust financial market? That is an important part of institution strengthening. There's also the issue of gender and diversity. How can you talk about the Amazon without talking about its ethnic diversity? In these complexities, there are indigenous groups without contact or recent contact, and also this is alongside other indigenous groups that are in ministries. So there's a lot of diversity there and a lot of work that can be done. Lastly, the initiative's biggest goal is to achieve all of this by still considering climate change, preserving biodiversity, and forest conservation. So when we think about the Amazon, we're talking about a great umbrella under which we can do a lot of work. And the IDB group is that coordinating force, how we can coordinate the work being done in the land, on the land and in the region. We talk a lot about the Amazon, but we have very little engagement with the folks doing the work on the ground or who are working for the Amazon from countries and from the different regions. This is why on this panel, we wanted to have a chat so that as the IDB and alongside you, we can all hear more from the field. Our thought was to have a discussion between the teenagers, as I mentioned. We have 2 policy icons who are women. It is very challenging for women in the Amazon in our countries to be in politics. And today, we have an opportunity that's incredible because we have 2 female icons when it comes to environmental policy who are very much focusing on the Amazon. We have the Brazil Environmental Minister, Natalia Silva. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us for personal reasons. And now we have the Environmental and Social Development Minister, Susana Muhamad, who is with us.
Gracias, ministra.
Thank you, Minister. We would love to hear about Colombia and how you are tapping into innovation in your approach to the Amazon, what the Colombian government's take is when it comes to the communities and the peace agreements. That's the complex issue in the Amazon. And also what you believe we could do as the IDB to be innovative in our work together. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the Inter-American Development Bank for really shining a spotlight on this regional Amazon initiative, for actually having an internal strategy. And I say that because I think that this is creating new awareness around how we can take on the climate reality. So far, there seems to be interference, says the interpreter. The climate structure brings us to work under NDCs as determined by each one of the countries. And our belief is that we can be up to the task given this crisis, thinking that every country will do what they can and that that's going to be enough. But what are we seeing? We're seeing that that isn't effective. And we're seeing that it isn't bringing us to actually scale up our efforts given the crisis. And so in a way, we're chasing our tails, going from one crisis to the other. But every time we get to a new crisis, we have lower resilience in the face of a changing global climate. And so we have these different dimensions and scales that we need to think about for our climate approach. And that's key. And one of the things we need to think about is the Amazon biome. That biome, since 1974, has come into the ambit of ACTO. It is seen as a global ecosystem, and there will be irreversible implications should something happen to it when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, and that is because when you burn the forest, that releases a great deal of carbon, but that also takes away its ability to fulfill its role in absorption capacity, but also in creating the necessary humidity and damp conditions that have an impact on the major cities in Latin America, like Sao Paulo and Bogota. The water that 9 million people consume, the population of Bogota, depends on that Amazon biome. There's so much humidity coming from that biome that scientists have called them these the rivers of the sky. And they actually come in contact with the Andes, just like you have contact with the mountains. You also have them with these peat bogs and these moorlands, and eventually it comes back to the land as water, and that is 75% of the drinking water Colombia has access to and is drinking today. Right now, we're at a critical juncture because we are about to lose that connection between the Andes and the Amazon in Colombia. That would mean that given climate change, that this increases the potential of losing water capacity and building capacity, and that would have an impact on not only water supply in the country, but also agriculture, and of course in the Andes, human settlement, which accounts for an important and significant number of the population in the country. This is why we believe that safeguarding that Andean-Amazon link and nexus and putting an end to the deterioration of the forest is not just an environmental issue. It has to do with national security and also the longevity of a country. But it is also a problem when trying to build the peace process that we're trying to advance. In Caquetá and Aguaviar and in different parts of the country, that was one of the key places where the FARC were able to become stronger. When, thanks to the signing of the peace agreement, the FARC ceased to be, that political and territorial presence the FARC had, the government wasn't able to take that back. And since 2016, we've seen mafias and other illegal groups come into that area and lead to some of the highest levels of deforestation. For the government, it was important to stop and halt the deforestation. That is unfortunately what is being called the Amazon deforestation arc. That is a threat to national security, to peace in the country, but also to securing water for the future of Colombia. How can we take on that complexity? This is where we look at this from two angles. The first is looking at it from an Amazon-Colombia scale perspective. The second has to do with how it relates to the 8 Amazon countries as part of an idea to safeguard the entire biome as a third pillar for environmental stability for the globe. In the first part, what we're looking to do is work in a balanced approach. There is a local political project that looks at the Amazon as the next frontier for agriculture, and by land grabbing illegally, hundreds of thousands of hectares are disappearing every year. This has to do with corruption, the money laundering activity, and international crime. On the other hand, there's the ability or inability of the Colombian governments of including these settlers, these peasant farmers, bringing them into a rule of law to create an economy that can actually recover and regenerate the forest by also creating the kind of conditions for that part of the Amazon. That is the Forest Development and Biodiversity Region. That's what we call it. We need government agencies to be established for this, to actually strike deals with these settlers that for decades have had no access to land titles, having environmental reservations rather, and having engagement with these indigenous groups. So 25% of the entire Amazon is being stewarded by the indigenous communities, and that is where the best conservation is happening. So we should look at how they're doing things in order to better protect our forest. That is the challenge that we have. And what does it mean? It means financial and economic stability and the ability of having a 20-year-long social contract. Something that we can finance every year, because you can't create this overnight. You also can't establish overnight the kind of government agency that can support it, or the capacity on the ground for the community to actually make the most of that economy. There need to be investment and research centers in the different areas that could ultimately, and working with the plants that can be turned into products. There are 2,000 plants from the Amazon for biodiversity that are now being processed for different industries. There needs to be better land planning. There needs to be a kind of covenant with these peasant farmers and these different places where some of the people don't even have access to the internet. That is a major challenge, but one that is making the government step up. We've created a fund, and 80% of carbon taxes and 600 billion rather pesos, $50 million annually over the next 20 years are being earmarked for these funds in order to support the social engagements we have in the Amazon. And so just to wrap up, what can the IDB do? How can the IDB help given this challenge? Not only for us in Colombia, but also to make stronger institutions regionally that we need to go forward. I think the IDB needs to take on this challenge and see it not only as a regional contribution for global climate crisis, but also start to think about how investments and how the government agencies that need to be created around this Amazon biome, there's value there, that's inherent value. That is something that shouldn't only be measured over time financially. Who is going to pay in the future for a city like Sao Paulo, Bogota to be completely dry? In the future, who is going to pay for the destabilization of the global climate environment? What ROI can we think about over the next few decades, and how can we measure any of that when hundreds of millions of people are going to be undergoing crises and living in horrendous conditions? There is no economy without a planet, and there's no economy without people. And I think that under that umbrella, we can come up with a solution, but a solution that is born within the country, within the land, this homegrown solution that can lead to a new kind of an economy that's very different from what we know. Thinking about ROI, but in a broader way, and something that can also help regenerate life as it is going, and not in doing what we're doing with the economy, because the economy right now continues to destroy those who make it come to be. Thank you.
Eu vengo, deixa eu ver. Déjame ver. usted. No. Sí.
Felicitaciones.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, ministra.
Ministers, thank you very much. I believe that now we can start to understand how important it is to have these social agreements, better understand also not just domestic issues, but international and regional issues as well. On this panel, we have representatives of the industries that are important for the Amazon, beginning with Dr. Fanny Guru, has a PhD in anthropology, who studied in La Chorrera. It's a very important component of our life in Latin America. This is the indigenous movement that started in Opiac, which is part of La Coica coordinating efforts. And the question for you is, what role can indigenous communities play when thinking about the most effective ways to secure financing, as well as other financial instruments to address the issues that matter today for the Amazon and for the regional integration that we have as a challenge on this part of the world? Well, good afternoon, and let me thank the IDB for having me. Thank you all for being here. Greetings to you from the coordinator of the Coica group from the Amazon region. It was created 39 years ago, and in 39 years, this is the first time they have elected a woman to be the coordinator of this international organization. COICA is an international organization that covers 9 countries, 9 indigenous organizations, 511 indigenous groups, 66 of which are in voluntary isolation. 511 different worldviews and languages and concepts of spirituality. Indigenous territory covers 33% of the forest. These are the rainforests throughout the Amazon River basin. These groups are a barrier against deforestation and forest degradation. This is why they're an important rampart against climate change. When talking about biodiversity for prosperity and sustainable growth, it's important to also talk about the kinds of concepts that we as indigenous peoples have. For example, we don't talk about conservation. We talk about taking care of nature, given the respect in our relationship with these ancestral land so that they can endure the test of time. When it comes to the economy, what we call the economy, in order to gain from an economy, the first thing is to have a respectful interaction with our land, our natural resources. So when we use raw materials, when we use biodiversity, we always take into account the environmental calendar, which the lunar and solar calendars govern. And so there isn't always raw material that we can tap into at will, 24/7, 365 days a year. All of this is cyclical for us. When we think about food independence, also for handicrafts and being able to do that work, that which is a foundational component of the economy in indigenous communities. For women that represent the 5 countries in the Amazon basin, we've been working on these inclusive and solidarity savings funds. These are places where there are no banks, there is no internet connection. This is where you truly live with and with that inherent relationship with nature. This is something that for the women working in these areas have helped to bring resources to the most isolated and remote places in the Amazon basin region. It's a beautiful thing too, because there is a little bit of initial capital that is injected, and then women can use this and increase their income and revenue and increasingly finance what will ultimately be a self-financing project. Also in Colombia, we worked with the stewards of the Amazon, las cuidadoras de la Amazonía. This was part of the Amazon Vision program in Colombia. 69 projects were something that we worked with. We worked alongside women, and what we can draw from this is that no matter how minimal, when you put funds in the hands of women, they eventually become abundant. This is why it's so important to work on entrepreneurship and provide those entrepreneurial opportunities to women. Indigenous community economic models are always based on this idea of buen vivir, living well. They're not thought of as a way to perpetually make money. And the idea is that we think about what nature is, and nature and natural resources aren't going to be with us forever. You can actually draw down enough that they're no longer there. You can deplete these resources. You have, given global warming, the inability to now grow food that would used to grow in the past. There are a lot of different species that are disappearing increasingly quickly. That's incredibly concerning for us as indigenous communities. So the economic models and these different economic endeavors are always based on how we can better take care of the environment. We can't think about these large-scale financial products for the Amazon. We need to think about an economic model that is tailored to the environment. If we think about large-scale projects, that always comes with the destruction of the Amazon. I think that sustainable development in the Amazon, it has the embedded principle of stewarding the Amazon. The Amazon which creates goods and services for living a full life and for the planet. It's what offers us oxygen. It's responsible for 20% of the globe's fresh water. It regulates the climate. It's a CO2 sink. It has these rivers of the sky, as was mentioned earlier, and it also provides a host of environmental services. We know that when forests are no longer around, that means that indigenous communities will no longer be around, and perhaps even we as a species, as a human species, will cease to exist. And so it's important as we think about taking care of the environment to think about how to discuss the issue of the caretakers of the Amazon and of these ecosystems so that they can continue to be around. That is true sustainable development, both for us as humans but also for the planet. Amazon products that come from these communities, for the most part, have an important add-on value. They come with ancestral knowledge, but also that respectful caring for the Amazon. And so the value we find in these Amazon products is very, very important. This is why when it comes to these different entrepreneurial activities, we need to just strengthen what's already happening because that's already there. And just to wrap up, I think that we need to urgently think about creating a bank for the Amazon. Recognizing and providing land titles, these collectively owned land for indigenous communities. That's important because they're the only ones, these communities are the only ones taking care and conserving these different territories. It's also important to think about Amazon activists because they're being murdered. Indigenous communities and settlers working in these areas, they need to be able to continue to have a living Amazon for a safe Amazon. We hope that these recommendations will make it onto the table so that the presidents who are going to meet soon can discuss it at the summit. Thank you.
Ahora voy a invitar una otra.
Now I'm going to call on another important actor that works with the local sector. So we have an entrepreneur here engaged in efforts that combines biodiversity, education, and tourism. So we're going to hear from Mr. Rafael Clavijo, and he is working in Leticia, where there are 3 countries that meet. So we just heard about the efforts underway, access to credit from Fanny, but how, as local entrepreneurs, are you dealing with the difficulties of accessing credit or other financial instruments? And how do you think that we can have mechanisms that will value nature as part of the capital of biodiversity? How can we get greater support from the private sector? Thank you. Well, yes, my name is Rafael, but everyone calls me Rafa. And I'm a co-founder, as you said, and I'm the general manager of the Amazon World Ecological Park in Leticia. And this began as a family project. And here I wanted to echo what Fanny was said. This is something that comes from our family. So I was born in the Amazon. I have lived half of my life and worked in the Amazon of Colombia. This began as a way of doing reforestation of old cattle grounds, and we collected living plants. But all that did was create a lot of expenditures, no income, so we had to involve tourism components so as to provide the conservation efforts with some financial sustainability. 10 years later, we opened this to the public, and so this became an environmental education center more than a tourism attraction. And who are the visitors? We showed them the results of projects we have with local actors. And as Fanny was saying, the more people know about something, the more care they take of it. And when we talk about local environmental literacy, you cannot say just protect the forest, don't hunt the animals that live in the forest. You have to work with the local economy. And in this way, we have been able to empower and promote many of the local enterprises that already exist in Leticia. There are families in Leticia, and this is a reality of the Amazon family. Most of the enterprises are family-owned. They aren't even community-owned. They're part of the community, yes, but they're family-owned, and most of them are led by women. So behind these families, or actually I should say, there are many Amazon products, and there are families behind those products, and they are changing the natural heritage in a sustainable fashion. They are using fruits, they are producing marmalades, herbal teas, shampoos, all sorts of candy using the Amazon biodiversity. And by selling these projects, they are creating an income. And because of that, our community is developing sustainably. So it's a sustainable development process. However, there are many challenges. And to answer your question, often, as part of the growth process, we find that the logistics are not easy. To produce in the Amazon with all of the requirements of NVIMA or FDA is not easy, because a lot of the input has to come from Bogota, Manaus, Quito, and you can only fly into Leticia. It takes a long time to get there on a boat. There are no roads. So just imagine how much you have to pay to get the products to the Amazon. Plus, these ingredients are seasonal, so they're not available year-round. And lastly, once you get the product ready, you have to sell it. You have to get it out. So we are a large population. The Amazon is the largest biomass in the world, almost equal to the size of the United States, but we have very few people in population. So to get to Manaus or to Quito, there are no towns that have more than 20,000 population. Leticia has 50,000. So when you design these products, there is a statistical error made, and you say, I want to benefit a lot of people, but there is no big population in the Amazon. So when you devise these projects, often they're very well-intentioned, they wither and die. And why is this? Because in the bidding documents, for example, it says that there has to be 10 or 20 or 30 families, but there aren't that many in a given area. So that's part of the challenges. Another challenge is we want to become a showcase for the world. Tourism has, well, tourism is a cluster that promotes many other sectors of the economy. So through tourism, transportation, handcrafts, restaurants, gastronomy, many other sectors of the economy profit. And we, in our promotion, because also we have logistics problems with promotion, there's a lack of connectivity. Our internet service is not round the clock. Those of you who have been there as tourists know how hard it is to get a good connection. In the last 3 or 6 months, we have something called Starling. And Starling has really changed our lives over the last 6 months. But before that, well, still, Starling is not accessible for all. You have to be able to afford this service because it is satellite-based. But when we talk about promotion, we say to the world, come see us. Tourism is an alternative for the Amazon because it encourages conservation. So a standing tree is more valuable than one that has been felled. So you say, okay, come to the Amazon, breathe the purest air on the planet, recharge yourself with the energy from the jungle. So people love this. They go to the Amazon. But as soon as they get there, what do they find? They find small cities with a population of 50, 60,000 people with 40,000 mopeds and motorbikes. And of course, everyone is creating a lot of exhaust fumes. Our cities are not interconnected with the rest of the country, so we have diesel generators that are also polluting incredibly. And our soil, as Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. I have a dream too. I think that our Amazon cities should become an example of smart cities. Right now, we're a really stupid city, but my dream is that we will have a smart city where vehicles, where motorcycles, where the boats that bring in all of the ingredients for our products, that bring things to our communities, hopefully they will no longer burn gasoline, but use solar energy, for example. Today, the world has the technology to be able to operate using water, and we have plenty of water. Or to use sunlight. We have sun. And the generators could be gas-powered. We were talking about that in Leticia. They're biodigesters that only need biomass and the temperature. And we have both things there, but we're not doing that. So that part is something that we dream about. We dream about these opportunities of gaining access to what already is there. We're not talking about something that's not there. In the world, these alternatives already exist. And it's not that we want to become a showcase, but we could show what can be done in the area of sustainability. But we also need to have the possibility of living a good life. We have to offer, those of us who live there, we have to be able to offer this possibility to our children, a good life in the future. But in terms of logistics, we're talking about how difficult it is to access the area. We have no roads, you have to fly in, but we do have a great riverway. We have the Amazon basin. All of this is interconnected along the Amazon River, and we have thousands, we have hundreds of streams that flow into the Amazon, but we're not using that because we don't have port infrastructure. In Leticia, that is my city where I live, it's the capital of the Amazon department in Colombia, and most things come in on ships or they're flown in. But air transport is very expensive. So we have no port infrastructure, but we have that great riverway. We have the Amazon and all of its tributaries. So we make every effort. We can report to you on where we stand, but all of us together, we could build a more sustainable, a smarter Amazon. But in addition to logistics, the infrastructure, the connectivity, internet, all of that is necessary, not only in terms of our productivity, but also for education. Education in many different areas. Education on health. There, connectivity is important. But another thing that is essential for sustainable productivity, and that is financial literacy. Many of our communities are not financially literate, so we often consume the results of our projects, and that financial literacy would help us be more sustainable, so that when the project's resources wind down, the project will continue to thrive without running into major problems. That is something that we're going to be sharing, where we talk about the design of microcredit lines for the Amazon. That is absolutely essential, especially because we have very specific configurations in terms of the size of our cities. They're small, and to be able to develop these projects, we don't need millions or billions. With $1,000, we can really hit the ball out of the park. But there is no local banking that would facilitate those loans, in part because there is a lack of land titling so as to put up collateral. There are different aspects that are a constraint in terms of size. So we don't have microcredit. We don't have lines of credit that are crafted to meet our needs. And obviously, that difficulty means that there is a reality now throughout the Amazon in the 8 countries, and that is the drop by drop. Those are usurious credits, loans, that are lent by people with no scruples that wind up threatening or blackmailing people. The person needs 200,000 pesos. That's less than $100. So now, in the Amazon, everyone is suffering from what we call this drop-by-drop funding. But that is because there is no suitable design to meet the needs, either in terms of amount or size or by volume. So I reiterate, in terms of statistics, we would like to be able to come up with big figures in terms of the number of beneficiaries, but we are very limited in terms of the size of our population. So with all of those efforts, we could make the Amazon much more sustainable. We in civil society know how important it is to have organized efforts, and Virgilio has been working with the Amazon for years. And also, currently, he is the president of the Fundação Amazônia Sustentável. So in hearing from Fanny, Rafael, and the minister, you as civil society, what do you think the possibilities are for innovation in the way in which multilateral banks and how other important actors can support biodiversity in the area? How can we have a local impact on the population and at the same time lower the rates of deforestation and protection of biodiversity? First of all, greetings to all. a warm greeting to the other panelists, and I want to congratulate the IDB for making this a seminar where we can discuss this important issue. I wanted to, and in Brazil, you say that there are some people that see the glass half empty and others that see it half full. I'm going to talk about the half full version. It's important to look at the Amazon with cautious optimism. Pope Francis says that there is no reason to be an optimist, but that we have to be hopeful. And there are many good things happening in the Amazon. We in FAS, we're the largest NGO in Brazil, we work with 922 communities. And there are many things that have already been done, things that are very interesting in terms of solar energy, also in the area of education, drinking water, entrepreneurship, things that we call a systemic approach. And what I think is missing is formulating more agile financial mechanisms, and I think that here the IDB could help. The Amazon right now is divided into many different parts. The ecological tragedy that we see, and the ministry said that this is a threat to the national security of Colombia and other countries. This is the good side. There is a lot of interest, and in theory, there's a lot of money. But the thing is, the money really doesn't reach the area quickly. We have a climate emergency. We are at the tipping point in many places in the Amazon. We're already there. Other areas are close to it. Also, we see that we have emergency. We're losing biodiversity. We also have problems with our indigenous peoples because they're being murdered. And the money is out there, but never arrives, or it arrives very slowly. So I think we need to devise new mechanisms. So I think that the IDB, with its Amazon initiative, does offer great hope, as the Pope would say. So here I'm going to give you an example. Yesterday, this was confirmed, and that is that Germany is taking action to support the provinces, the states in Brazil. It is a program called Fondo Floresta, and it is 30 million euros to support a large area in the Amazon. And they came up with an innovative mechanism because the money, instead of going to the state, instead of going to the federal government, goes to a civil society organization that is private in nature. So there are several institutions of this nature, and we were chosen to manage those funds so that we can improve the effectiveness, the efficiency of subnational governments. There is an excellent opportunity for the IDB to come in with a matching fund. And this is an example of an innovative mechanism to use civil society, which is less bureaucratic. We in Latin America have a very serious problem, and that is bureaucracy. I was a Secretary of State, as Tatiana said, for 5 years, and bureaucracy is incredible. So also, then we have the international bureaucracy, the IDB, the Gatchev, the World Bank, and that's part of the problem. How can we come up with more agile, nimble mechanisms? And then another message. I think that we have to look at deforestation not from the standpoint of being law enforcement, but we have to look at it in terms of comprehensive development, talking about a systemic approach, because we have to look at problems of milk for children all the way up to and through internet. And perhaps the internet may offer solutions. We are doing a lot on telehealth, teleeducation with the internet. And we've been doing this for years. So that is already in place, but we have to work with the concept of prosperity. To maintain the forest, there's something very important, and that is what we can call climate justice or climate injustice. So the Afro-descendants, the Aboriginal communities, they are victims of climate change, but it should be the other way around. They should be receiving payment because of environmental services. We in the Amazon have something called Bolsa Foresta, and it's a payment. It's not only a payment in cash. In addition to the cash payment, these are investments in education, health, energy, internet, and all of these things that make up the systemic approach. So this is something where I think we need to mobilize big funds. We just talked about the 30,000 euros, this fund that was just given to us, but we have to look at 5 billion a year so as to be able to change the direction of the history of development. Because what has happened is the paradigm of development in all the countries, not only Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. There, I think we need to change the paradigm so as to be able to develop but keep our forests standing. And here we have to look at science, technology, education, innovation. We need education that is pertinent, not only good education. We want people to become financially literate, and we have a great program on financial literacy for the indigenous population, etc. So I would like to leave you with a more optimistic view. I think that there are some very good examples, and what we need is for organizations like the IDB to be the leaders of an acceleration of innovative mechanisms so as to reach the field. That is what we need. Thank you. Thank you, Virgilio. Now, Alexandra is the General Secretary of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. So, Alexandra, I would like to hear from you. What is OTCA thinking? How is it coordinating things so that these challenges can be attacked in a more collaborative fashion? Thank you, Tatiana. I wanted to thank the Inter-American Development Bank for inviting the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization to participate in this panel. When you talk about the Amazon region, you have to remember that this is an interconnected ecosystem. It knows no geopolitical boundaries. And there, the Amazon countries, because sometimes when you talk about the Amazon, they talk about Brazil, and that's true, but other countries like Bolivia, Suriname, Venezuela represent the other 40% of the Amazon. That is very important. So there was a signing of this treaty so as to work together, to collaborate, but in a space where we look at political interests, but also we look at operational implementation or action. And all of that is very necessary. We have to understand this for this type of initiative or fund. That is something we see now with the Amazon initiative at the IDB. It's important to open up that window for cooperation with a more regional view, especially when you're talking about the Amazon region, because there you cannot be controlling water quality upstream, for example, in Bolivia, without looking at it in Peru or Brazil. So it's part of a comprehensive management. There has to be also regional management. So there's this intergovernmental organization of our member countries, and all of us are working in the same direction. In the last 4 years, and thank you for the support given by the 8 member countries that have strengthened this organization. So the OTCA is more operational in its approach now. It is implementing public policies in each of the member countries. And all of this is to show the value added brought by the organization in terms of complying with goals, the goals of the Paris Agreement, and all of the multilateral organizations that we have. We have to understand that the Amazon region is not middle income. The 8 countries are ranked as middle income, but you have to understand that the region reflects a difference. Socioeconomic characteristics teach us that the Amazon requires greater cooperation, more deliberate access to financing with lower interest loans, and obviously international cooperation has to have to do with innovation, access to technology that is required by the region. Now, when we talk about biodiversity, and it's been said that Latin America has 40% of the biodiversity in the world, and the Amazon has something like 80% of the biodiversity of that 40%. So it has been shown that the biodiversity potential of lumber products coming out of the Amazon is creating or could create more income than the conventional extraction industries that operate in the area. For example, and here I use 2 examples coming from Brazil, the areas of production that were given in concession for extraction activities using seeds, acai, cacao, they have created 1.5 billion in reais. That is $300 billion a year. And that is without having robust financial investment, without cutting-edge technology, and that shows us that there is great potential there. Also, in 2017, 2018, acai, cacao, hazelnuts are producing more income than livestock or soy. So those activities are highly operational. Now, the ministries of the economy, the ministers of planning are going to say, okay, these are numbers, so we're betting on biodiversity, standing forest, sustainable management so as to conserve, but also produce sales. That is the possibility that the IDB now, with the Amazon initiative, is supporting. We work with water and sanitation. With the IDB, we're working on projects, and we're beginning to implement different activities. And I think that with the Amazon initiative, in all the aspect of biodiversity and forests, becomes very relevant, and it allows us to implement this type of project. And generally speaking, with countries, we have identified the possibility of scaling up and reproducing these good examples that already exist as the operational component of the work being done in the different countries so that they can be spread throughout the region. But as Fanny was saying, and our representative of local communities said the same thing, what you need is to guarantee access to international markets. There's a different perception of a mass-scale production and a quality production that involves indigenous peoples or communities. And this is an additional effort for our countries. And in concluding my remarks, Tatiana, I think that we, in producing public policy, have to address the possibility of what is regional. We have to look at these different windows that provide additional access, because sometimes the countries have these national resources, but they should not put us in positions where we compete between the communities, working with incentives, or as smaller micro-enterprises, or as indigenous communities. So we need to look at an overview so as to provide different types of access to financial resources and also to technology, innovation, and capacity strengthening. Thank you.
Bueno, yo sé que estamos en la hora.
Well, I know that it is lunchtime after all, but we do have someone with us. And it will be interesting to hear just very briefly from them because we started our panel with the Colombian minister, and we have an opportunity now to hear the Cobija mayor talk to us. This is a town in the Pando department, and it's important because we can hear from different levels of government. There needs to be cooperation between different levels of government, and the policy needs to be regional in nature as well. So, Ana Hayes, if you can please be brief. I know that we're over time. Well, a very good afternoon to everyone. I am very pleased to be here with such important players, especially for such an important part of the world that is the Amazon. This is a reality. We need to be very aware of how important it is. And one of the saddest parts of all of this is that every day, even as we come here and meet, deforestation in the Amazon continues. These events and these agendas and programs that the IDB has, Tatiana, Virgilio, and the entire team from the IDB is working on this. Thanks again for inviting us. They're all looking for alternate ways of improving this. I am happy to hear from the former environmental minister. Thank you very much for the work you're doing in looking for ways to, if not halt, at least dial down the deforestation in the Amazon. This is something that we think about from our town. We're happy about what our local officials are doing because they are recognizing the importance of this and they are giving us support. We need to think about, for example, the hazelnuts, which is a key product that we have where we are, these Brazilian nuts as they're known in other places. The problem with this is that Bolivia doesn't recognize or doesn't know the product. And those who don't know where it comes from, they look elsewhere internationally for these products to come in. And so we appreciate the support from the IDB. Another way that more work can be done and more results can be achieved is by having more outreach with the population. Acai, for example, that's a key crop for us. We need to enhance our forests, improve that for tourism, but our forests need to remain whole. When you tear a tree down, you lose everything. But when you preserve it, you can, on a daily basis, have a source of revenue. We can see an example of that in our region, where we also have just vast amounts of land. But as we know, and this is important for the Amazon region, the population is very small. In our department, we're talking about a population of 200,000. In the capital, you have 105, so 60% of the population. So giving more value to acai and on the market looking for the burichi, as they call it in Portuguese, or the hazelnut, or acai, look for these. And that way we can have a more stable and safe market where we can have a safe source of revenue. And government programs can be part of the solution. There are a number of efforts that we've already undertaken. For example, signing agreements with the different local government authorities for school feeding programs. There was the acai boom that came from some of these activities, but there's also a product this is a product that not many people know about. And so again, there needs to be an outreach program so the entire country can learn more about why we are actually eating these things or drinking these things, what the nutritional facts are, the protein, how many hazelnuts a day can give you your daily protein. That information is important. In our country, sometimes we think that acai comes down to what ice cream flavor you're going to choose. But they don't understand that when you consume that product, you're also helping with Amazon conservation and you're improving living conditions for those living in the Amazon. That is what I think is key. As well as being able to work closely and directly with local officials. I'm talking about political officials, but also community officials, the indigenous communities and peasant farming community. So again, thanks again. I don't want to go on too long and overstay my welcome, but thank you, and thank you. It was great listening to you all. We look forward to seeing you all in Cobija in Bolivia. Thank you very much.
Bueno.
Very well. So we are over time, but to conclude, I'd like to say that what brings us together as a people of Latin America is culture. And as people of the Amazon, what brings us together is culture. An important part of culture is music. we in Latin America always have a musical background behind anything we think about. We heard the president talk about the Amazon Initiative as the Amazon Regional Integration Initiative. That immediately took me to an Amazon soundtrack. And that made me think of carimbó, which is a traditional music from my country. And the song I thought about is something that really talks about what we have to do. And it says this.
Embarca, molha o pé, mas não molha a meia. Embarca, morena, embarca, molha o pé, mas não molha a meia. Viemos de outra terra fazer bagunça na terra alheia. Viemos de outra terra fazer bagunça na terra alheia. Gracias.
Muy bien.
Vamos.
Nos queremos.
Vamos a hacer un receso.
We're going to have a break, and when we return, we'll hear Seminar 3 on Sustainable and Inclusive Infrastructure and Regional Integration. We'll take a break now, allow you all to network, and have a great afternoon.